Hey everybody, this is Carson with Top Go Productions, and today we have our very first 5-player Commander game featuring the 2013 Commander pre-constructed decks and the changes that we suggested in our video series on the product. Cameron is playing Nekasar, Sarah is playing Rune, I am playing Prosh, Kyle is playing Sidri, and Brian is playing Marath. Now here I would usually tell you what we had in our opening hands, but I won't even bother to do so, and you will see why shortly. I won the roll and went first, played and activated a Terramorphic Expanse, getting a forest, and ended my turn. Kyle played a Dwar Isle Refuge, gaining a life, and passed. Brian put a Selesnya Guildgate into play. Cameron played Command Tower as his land for turn, and then proceeded to cast Winds of Change. We all discarded our hands and drew new ones, some getting better grips and others getting worse. Cameron ended his turn. Sarah played Evolving Wilds and activated it to find an island before ending her turn. I played a forest for turn and cast Swiftfoot Boots. Kyle laid down a plains, cast Soul Ring, and then quickly followed that up with Darksteel Ingot. He passed his turn. Brown played a Tranquil Thicket, tapped for turn, and passed. Cameron laid down an island for turn and tapped out for Nightscape Familiar. He passed the turn to Sarah. Sarah played Bant Panorama on her turn, cast nothing, and ended her turn. I played a Savage Lands for turn and passed. Kyle played a Swamp for turn and cast Sidri, decided not to attack with a Soul Ring, and passed the turn. Brown laid down a mountain for turn and ended. Cameron also laid down a mountain for turn and then ended his turn. Sarah played Selesnya Guildgate and passed. I played Care Keep for turn and cast Goblin Bombardment, ending my turn. Kyle played a Swamp for turn. He then animated his Darksteel Ingot and went to attack, but Cameron cast Sudden Spoiling, turning it into a 0-2 with no abilities. Due to recent rule changes, Brown was able to then cast Hull Breach to destroy the Ingot. Kyle passed. Brown played a Colony Garden, getting a 0-1 plant token. She ended her turn. Cameron played Molten Slag Heap and tapped out to cast Nekasar. He passed his turn. Sarah drew an additional card in her upkeep and lost 2 life. She then played a Plains, thought for a moment, and cast Darksteel Mutation on the Nekasar, turning the Lich into a measly 0-1 insect. I played a Kessig Wolf Run for turn and passed. Kyle played a Temple of the False God, had nothing else to do, and ended his turn. Brown played a Forest on her turn and cast Marath, getting 3+1/+1 counters on the Elemental before passing her turn. Cameron put a storage counter on his Molten Slag Heap, did nothing else, and passed. Sarah put down a Plains for turn and tapped out to cast her General Rune. At the end of her turn, I got a Kobold with Care Keep. I began my turn playing a Forest. With nothing else to do, I attacked Cameron with my 0-1 Kobold, which Cameron then blocked with his 0-1 Nekasar. I pumped the Kobold to a 3-1 with Kessig Wolf Run, dealing 2 damage to Cameron and passed the turn. Kyle played Opal Palace and ended his turn. At the end of his turn, though, Brian removed a counter from Marath and shot Nightscape Familiar with it. Cameron regenerated the creature, so Brian removed one more counter and shot the Nightscape Familiar again to finally kill it. Brian played a Plains for turn and tapped all of her mana to cast Baloth Woodcrasher before ending her turn. Cameron missed a land drop in his turn and cast Grixis Charm, choosing to shake the Darksteel Mutation by bouncing Nekasar back to his hand. He passed his turn. Sarah played a Forest for turn and tapped 5 lands to cast Prophet of Krufix before ending her turn. I missed a land drop in my turn and cast Siphon Flesh, having everyone sack at least one dude, but in response, Sarah cast Mirror Entity and sacked him to the Siphon Flesh. I ended up getting 3 zombie tokens and ending my turn. Kyle played Transguild Promenade for turn and cast Crystal Shard. He then followed that up by casting Sidri and passed his turn. Brian untapped and chose to remove a counter from Marath to put a +1/+1 counter on Baloth Woodcrasher. She then recast Marath, getting 5 counters on him. She played a land for turn, a Selesnya Sanctuary, bounced a mountain, and triggered Baloth Woodcrasher's landfall ability. She then went to combat, attacking Kyle for 9 damage before ending her turn. Cameron played Nivix Guildmage on his turn, put another storage counter in Molten Slag Heap, and ended his turn. Sarah played a Plains on her turn and tapped 3 for 1,000 Year Elixir. She then decided to use Rune to bounce one of my zombies, and by doing so, get rid of it for good. In response, I sacked the zombie to a Goblin Bombardment to shoot back at Sarah for 1. She passed her turn. I cast Sudden Demise on my turn, pumping 5 mana into the spell and choosing green, hoping to pretty much clear the board of green creatures. In response, Sarah flickered her Prophet of Krufix with Rune. As I ended my turn, Prophet of Krufix returned to the battlefield. Kyle drew, played no lands, and decided to pass the turn. Brown replayed her mountain for turn and tapped out to cast Spawning Grounds attached to her Tranquil Thicket. She ended. Cameron removed his storage counters from Molten Slag Heap and tapped out to cast Nekasar from his hand. He then attacked Brian for 2 with Nivix Guildmage and passed the turn. Sarah drew 2 cards and lost 2 life. She then played a Forest for turn and tapped out to cast Rune. I drew 2 cards and lost 2 life on my turn and cast Spoils of Victory, putting a much needed mountain onto the battlefield untapped before ending my turn. Kyle cast Sanctum Gargoyle on his turn, getting his Darksteel Ingot back and then casting the Ingot. At the end of his turn, Sarah used Rune to flicker one of my zombie tokens. In response, I sacked it to shoot her with a Goblin Bombardment, but in response to that, she cast Acidic Slime to destroy the bombardment. Finally, in response to the slime, I sacked the rest of my tokens to shoot Sarah for 2 more. Sarah took a grand total of 3 damage before Brion's turn started. Brion untapped, drew 2 cards, took 2 damage, looked at her hand, and passed her turn. Cameron untapped and finally got a land drop in the form of an island. He cast Jace's Archivist and then put a storage counter on Molten Slag Heap. He went to combat, hitting me for 2 with his Guild Mage. Before ending his turn, Sarah used Rune to flicker Acidic Slime, blowing up Kyle's Crystal Shard. Sarah played an island for turn and cast Prime Speaker Zagana for a 5/5 creature, drawing 5 cards. In response to the Zagana trigger, she flickered Cameron's Nekasar so she wouldn't have to take the 5 damage. She then ended her turn. At the end of Sarah's turn, I made a Kobold creature. I started my turn drawing 2 cards and taking 2 damage. I then cast Prosh, getting 6 more Kobold creatures for a total of 7. I equipped Prosh with Swiftfoot Boots and swung at Cameron, choosing to sacrifice all of my Kobolds to deal a total of 12 general damage to Cameron. I ended the turn. Kyle tapped 3 mana to cast Crawl Space on his turn. He did nothing else and went to end his turn, but Sarah flashed in Djinn of Infinite Seats before the turn ended. Brion played a Plains on her turn. Brion then tapped a ton of mana to cast Savage Twister for 5. Sarah flickered her Prophet of Krufix in response, while everything else on the table, except for Djinn of Infinite Deceits, went to the graveyard. Brion then cast Sprouting Vines with the Storm counter at 1, allowing her to fetch 2 mountains. She passed the turn. On Cameron's turn, he cast Prosperity for 2, allowing everyone to draw 2 cards. He then played a Swamp as the land for his turn and put another storage counter on Molten Slag Heap. At the end of the turn, Sarah flashed in Diluvian Primordial. Kyle had no instants or sorceries in his graveyard, so Sarah stole and used the Hull Breach to destroy Brion's Spawning Grounds and my Swiftfoot Boots, grabbed an island with my Spoils of Victory, and reset everyone's hands with Cameron's Winds of Change. Sarah's turn finally started with cycling Drifting Meadow. She played an island for turn and cast Rune yet once again. I played a Swamp for turn and cast Nature's Spiral. I returned Swiftfoot Boots to my hand from my graveyard and then cast the boots. I had 8 cards, so I discarded Butch Malakir and ended my turn. Kyle played an island for turn and cast Chromatic Lantern. He then cast Sphinx Summoner, fetching up Sphinx of the Steel Wind. As he did that, Sarah flashed in Mist Meadow Witch. Kyle finished off his turn with casting Divinity of Pride. Brion cast Sol Ring on her turn and cast Grazing Gladeheart. She then played a mountain as a land for her turn, getting 2 life off of her Gladeheart. She then followed that play up by casting Terror Ravager and the Illusionist's Bracers. She passed the turn. Cameron played Temple of the False God in his turn and then cast Mnemonic Wall, returning Sudden Spoiling back to his hand and ending the turn. Putting an island into play for her turn, Sarah cast Sword of Perunes. She then equipped the sword to Rune, and when she ended her turn, I made a Kobold. I played a Swamp as the land for my turn and cast Charnel Hard Worm. I equipped Swiftfoot Boots to the Worm and went to combat, swinging at Cameron. He blocked with his Mnemonic Wall, taking 2 and allowing me to return a card, but in response to the damage trigger, Sarah flashed an Angel of Finality and exiled my graveyard. I ended my turn. Kyle played Springjack Pasture as land for his turn. He went to combat, hitting Brion with Divinity of Pride and passed his turn. Brion played a mountain for turn and gained 2 life off of Grazing Gladeheart. She then cast Harmonize, drew 3 cards, and cast Temple of Discovery. Everyone except Cameron decided to fetch lands. Kyle got Command Tower, I got Temple of the False God, and Sarah got Bant Panorama, while Brion got Command Tower, Temple of the False God, a mountain, and Opal Palace. All those lands went into play untapped. Brion then recast Marath, using Opal Palace to give him an additional 3 +1/+1 counters for a total of 10. She then equipped Illusionist Bracers onto Marath and went to combat, swinging at me with Terror Ravager. I chump blocked with my Kobold and Brion ended her turn. Cameron played a mountain for turn and once again cast Nekasar. He thought for a moment and passed his turn. Sarah decided not to bounce Nekasar at the beginning of her turn and draw 2 cards and took 2 damage. She then played a Plains as her land for the turn and cast Karmic Guide, returning Prime Speaker Zagana to the battlefield. She flickered Nekasar in response to Zagana's Enter the Battlefield trigger. Zagana became a 6/6 and Sarah drew 6 cards. She also cast Farhaven Elf, fetched up a forest, and cast Darksteel Ingot. Sarah couldn't win the game that turn, so she didn't want to attack and decided to pass the turn. I drew 2 cards, took 2 damage, and played Grim Backwoods on my turn. But at the beginning of my turn, Sarah cast Terrastodon, destroying my Swiftfoot Boots, Brion's Illusionist Bracers, and Kyle's Crawl Space, giving us all 3/3 elephants. I cast Capricious Efreet and passed my turn. Kyle drew 2 and took 2 damage. He cast Obelisk of Esper and followed it up with Sphinx of the Steel Wind. He then decided to attack me with Divinity of Pride for 8, gaining 8 life. He passed. Brion drew 2 and took 2 damage, played Homeward Path, and went to combat, attacking Cameron with Terror Ravager. She ended the turn. Cameron played a Swamp for turn and tapped 7 mana to cast Sky Scribing, having everyone draw 5 cards. In response, Sarah flickered Nekasar so no one had to take the damage. Before Cameron's end step, Sarah flickered her Prime Speaker Zagana, and so at the end step, both creatures entered the battlefield at the same time. With Zagana's trigger on the stack, Sarah flickered Nekasar yet again so that she could draw 10 cards without losing life. Before Sarah's turn actually began, I used Grim Backwoods to sacrifice my Capricious Efreet to draw a card, knowing that anything I chose for his ability would just get flickered by Sarah. On her main phase, Sarah cast Eternal Witness, returning Mirror Entity back to her hand, and then cast it. She thought about combat math with Mirror Entity for a moment and decided to make all of her creatures 12/12s. Before she had a chance to declare attacks, Cameron cast Sudden Spoiling, turning all of her creatures into 0/2s with no abilities. Sarah discarded back down to 7 and passed. I drew 2 and lost 2 life, and played a swamp for turn. I cast Plague Boiler, but Sarah countered it with Arcane Denial. I decided to go to combat, hitting Cameron with Charnel Horde Worm so I could get Swiftfoot Boots back from my graveyard. I cast the boots and ended my turn. I drew 2 cards and Sarah drew 1 card, both on Kyle's upkeep thanks to Arcane Denial, Sarah taking 1 damage and me taking 2. Kyle drew 2, took 2, and cast Phyrexian Gargantua, sacrificing 2 Go tokens he had made earlier to help cast the creature, and then drawing 2 more cards and losing a total of 4 life. Kyle played his land for turn, a Plains, and cast Sanguine Bond. He went to combat, sending Sphinx of the Steel Wind at Cameron and Divinity of Pride at me. Brian then followed up that Divinity of Pride with a Boros Charm, hoping to put me even closer to death. But Sarah did not want to lose that much life from Sanguine Bond, so in response to the charm, Sarah flickered the Divinity of Pride, making Cameron the only player hit for damage that turn. Kyle chose to have Sarah lose 6 life from the Sanguine Bond, and at the end of his turn, Brian used all 10 counters on Marath to shoot Sarah for 10. Brian played a Force return and then used her Opal Palace to help cast Marath. She paid 9 for her general, and since that was the 4th time she had cast him, she got 4 more counters, making Marath a 13/13. Unfortunately, Brian only had 11 more mana open, which was only enough to bring Sarah down to 1 life. But she decided to do so by tapping the rest of her mana and shooting Sarah for 11 damage. Before her turn ended, Sarah flashed in Revelark. Cameron played a Spiteful Visions on his turn, hoping that it might just be enough to finish Sarah off. He then played an island and cast Dragon Mage before his turn ended. Before his end step began, Sarah used Mist Meta Witch to exile Flickerwisp. Flickerwisp then re-entered the battlefield at the beginning of the end step, exiling Cameron's Spiteful Visions until her next end step. Before she drew for turn, she used Ruin to flicker Cameron's Nekasar so that she would not lose the game. Sarah played an island for turn and made Fairy Conclave a 2/1 flying creature. She used Mirror Entity to turn all those creatures into 13/13s, and with the help of Sword of Perunes, they were all 15/13s. Knowing she couldn't hold out much longer at 1 life, she swung all of her creatures at everyone, choosing the right amount to kill everyone but Kyle, who had several flyers and blockers waiting for her. With his various methods of life gain, he was able to gain enough life to finally kill Sarah using Sanguine Bond and be the last player standing. This game really shows off the power of all the different Commander 2013 generals, Marath and Rune being the real standouts in this particular game. If you're interested in the modified versions of the decks we played, check out our series of videos where we outline how to improve these decks on a tight budget. I hope you enjoyed this gameplay. I'm Karsh from Top Go Productions, and as always, thanks for watching.